Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anatoly, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Sherey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to pose any question for our guests. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким покліном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Katerina. Today's guest will be introduced by Professor Victor Fett.
Thank you very much. And there are many guests today because we're doing a book presentation, which is a collective effort. This is a year of poetry, 2024. The book is in Russian language, published by Oleg Fedorov in Kiev. And I'm glad to see a few authors contributors to this book. Here, Yana Kane, Marina Eskin, Jan Propstein, and they are from the United States. And also we have Olga Agur joining us from Haifa, Israel. Thank you very much for coming today live. I will give you all opportunity to read a few of your own poems in English translation, and we have quite a lot of cross-fertilization here, because some of the authors are translators, and some of the translators, by the way, were featured on our other programs, and we also will have an international group of translators, Kapilka, coming back next week with Yana Kane, who is present today. So it's a very complex international effort. Let me talk for a few minutes about the book itself. Here is my presentation. The book's Year of Poetry come out in Kiev for 3 years now, and this was the first volume. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
The first volume in 2022. Our already established tradition with Oleg Fedorov's wonderful publishing house. I will talk about them in a moment. We published, as I said, 3 volumes. This was the first one by the new year 22-23. Second volume, you see this wonderful covers by Kiev artist and Mykola Sologub. And then these are all 3 together, about 100 authors from all over the world writing in Russian, all over the world, except the aggressor countries, Russian Federation and Belarus. This is Mykola Sologub and his studio in Kiev. And here is our good angel Oleg Fedorov, who is publishing a lot of books. Practically every week we see 1 or 2 new books in Russian or Ukrainian published by Oleg, and especially in these last 3 years of the full-scale war. Here are just a few names, including some of our authors and some others from different countries, covers which have been published by Oleg's publisher house, which now is probably one of the most prominent in terms of not just fiction, but also all kinds of books. Poetry, a lot of this, of course, is written by people who had to leave Ukraine due to the war, like Mikhail Yudovsky here in Germany. A lot of them are written by people from other countries. Here is one of our recent podcasts, we talked about wonderful translation, new translation of children's fairy tale by Galina Itskovich, our wonderful psychologist here in New York who works with Ukrainian children, and whose translation is a separate story that's also published by Oleg. And here is our good friend and mentor, Professor Liberman from Minneapolis, famous linguist and also a poet and literary critic. And in his words, I refer in our preface to this year's volume. Of course, the major premise is to simply preserve and present what is written today, not just about the war, but during the war and influenced by the war. In this case, in Russian language. Of course, there are also Ukrainian language anthologists, translations into English and other languages, as we know. We are doing this in Russian, and many of our authors are from Ukraine, Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Many are from a diaspora. We can talk later in a discussion about what it means to write in Russian today. I know there are many different opinions, first of all, depending on where you are and who you are. But all of us agree that our hearts and poems are those of people who cannot remain silent and definitely are on the side of Ukraine fighting the aggression of the modern Russian Federation. We were mentioned in an interesting review quite recently by Ukrainian culturologist Vitaly Chernetsky. He's at University of Kansas, USA, originally from Odessa. He noticed, looking at our 3 volumes, that in the first year of poetry, in the end of 22, it happens that we still referred to earlier waves of Russian immigration. The first of those, as you might know, was 100 years ago, fleeing Bolshevik Revolution. And we thought, or felt, at least many of us at this time, in the end of 22, that we have some space for Russian language still unified, for free Russian language outside of Russia, of course. I'm not talking right now about those heroes who write inside Russia. It's a separate issue. However, Vitaly noticed that at least I myself, as an editor, got more pessimistic by the end of 23, noting that we cannot anymore rely on the shared past of this language, because what goes on right now, in my opinion, and of many others, is disintegration of this culture based on and writing in the same language. So basically, the space of Russophone culture, and especially poetry, becomes pulverized and becomes much more individual. We can talk about it. Our authors are all over the world. Most contributors, half of contributors to this group are American, or at least living in the United States. We look at residents. 1/3 from Ukraine, others from Europe, Israel, Canada, and even one from New Zealand. In Europe, we cover many countries. These are expat people who may have come from Russia or Ukraine during the war or many years earlier. We don't know, and we do not choose. People who want to participate send us the poems. My duty is that of editor and compiler, if you wish. Here are just a few faces and names and countries. People from Ukraine, like wonderful Mykola Lobanov, who is publishing, by the way, another series called Artelen of both prose and poetry, and also translations. Artelen already had 16 volumes, 16 years. Victoria Nikolaeva fled from Ukraine in the beginning of the war. She is in Israel. Boris Khersonsky, one of the most well-known poets in Ukraine, he resides in Italy. People in France, Germany, Israel, of course, of different waves of Aliyah. I need to mention separately Irina Yurchuk, who is also one of our authors from Ukraine, originally from Kharkiv and living in Germany. And this is her another book, just came out by the same Oleg Fedorov publishers, called Nadzemny Perkhid, or Overpass. And these are translations of poems from Russian from authors who write in Russian to Ukrainian by Irina. So it's a very complex, cross-cultural, again, event which might not have happened even before the war. We now form very interesting and different initiatives. There is in memoriam section, as usual. We mourn passing of Bakhit Kenjeev, one of the most prominent names. He lived in New York recent years. Bakhit is very recognizable figure to anyone who is interested in Russophone poetry. And his last book was also published by Oleg Fedorov, right here, at the Breath of Black. This is the title is quote, of course, from Pushkin's drama. And here, going back, faces of less known to general public, Arkady Shtipel, who is Ukrainian, but lived many years in Moscow, returned right before the war to Odessa and recently passed away. And also our constant author, Alexander Rutkevich from Toronto, Canada, who is more known under his pen name David Siglevich, who concludes this volume of this year. This is Bakhit's last book. I will now kind of invite people. Of course, we have authors present, at least 3 of them. 4, I'm sorry, 5 with me. So I don't have my own contribution here, but I will have 9 poems. And aside from the authors who can read them out loud for our record, I will allow myself to read those texts. I start with Andrei Kostinsky, and this is translated by Yana Kanes. So Yana, would you like to read it yourself then?
Certainly. Thank you. So Andrei lives in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and he writes poetry that directly reflects the war, such as this one, and he also writes poetry that sort of reflects the world at large, and that's remarkable to me about many poets in Ukraine, that they write about war and it's not only war. And this poem accompanied a photograph of a region in Kharkiv that was heavily bombed. Clips of bombings of a bewildered city, dotted lines of breath on repeat. If only sleep lasted forever, dreams blend into reality with the sensation of flying. A crossroads, peeled away from itself, searches for footprints in the sky.
Thank you, Yana. Andrei is a valued contributor, and he is in Kharkiv. He experiences bombing actually every day. This is a larger poem, complex one, free verse by Galina Itskovich, a very common friend of this program, contributor, translated by Maria Blostein in Canada. Since Galina couldn't be with us, I will read this stunning free verse called Fear. When I listen to stories... Oh, Galina is here?
Yes. Actually,
Galina?
I'm here, but yes, I'm here.
You are. Please,
Yeah. Yes.
please read.
Okay,
Sorry.
yeah, I was prepared to listen to you, but
Oh.
but yes, I'm here. Yes, so
Well,
okay.
Your choice.
Yes. Okay, I'll read. Yes. Fear. When I listen to stories of those who stepped out of war for a spell, some strings, like the one in the last line of The Cherry Orchard, snap inside me. My belly, like a dandelion, explodes into fluff, detaching from the spinal cord stem. And where's your fear located? Not too many places for it. Mine unoriginally is in my belly. I still haven't found where my empathy for humanity sits. If I strip the husk of what must be done and what would be nice to do, who am I? I'm a small, short-haired animal, knowing all that can be gnawed through like a rabbit or a chipmunk. I drag whatever I can into a fool's shallow, exposed burrow. I know to live. I don't know life outside the fear. Or am I a deer with a hole in my stubborn chest? My flattened relatives line the roads. I am guided by the last desperate fear. I could have never endured their stories were I human.
Thank you, Galina. We have with us Marina Eskin from New York.
No, from Boston. From Boston.
I'm sorry, from Boston.
Yeah.
And if Marina can tell us a few words about whatever she wants, her poem, her translator, I just need to preface it with one image that is important here for those who are familiar. A snail on Mount Fuji slope. That actually is from the very famous science fiction book called simply A Snail on a Slope by Drukarskii brothers from the late 60s, and everyone educated at this time in Russian knows this title, which I guess has different meanings. Please, Marina.
Thank you. And it's also the snail on the Mount Fuji slopes comes from the very famous Japanese haiku. So I have to say that Jan Singleton is an American writer. He's an author of a novel, Two Big Differences. It's about Odessa. Around 2014. So it's a very interesting novel, and I know Ian for a long time, since he was a very young writer, and we mutually respect each other's and like each other's work. So he translated quite a bit of my poems. And this one was written probably the early 2023, when the war was already more than a year, raging for more than a year. She eviscerated my dreams, the war, not of my mother or father anymore. In my dreams, I lived a competing life. Now I've got to give it up to that whore. Don't even dream of my friend. What dreams? It's day in Ukraine during my night. No nostalgia. There is sorrow and guilt filling my head up to the brim. I don't talk the talk. Don't walk the walk. I'm a snail on Mount Fuji's slope. There are plenty razors other than Occam's, but the word was crawl when fate spoke. I don't need GPS or a weather vane in order to know which way to move. If I see evil cutting into my lane, I edge heaven to outmaneuver, to outplay evil at a sluggish pace, survive the worst by the grace of God. But it's easy enough to squish a snail on a sleepy morning after it rained. It
Thank
was a
you
moment, of
very
course,
much.
of despair when I wrote this poem.
Thank you very much, Marina. The word in the last quatrain, Vozhd, is basically equivalent to German Führer, and in Soviet context, it was used for Lenin and Stalin for decades. It's originally it's a chieftain rather than leader. We moved to Olga in Israel in Haifa, and we are very grateful for Olga to joining us from across the ocean from another war. And this poem is again translated by Yana Kane, and here we will ask Olga, the author, to read this translation of a very interesting title, which I just mentioned, Joseph Stalin. For those who don't know much about him, he also fancied himself a linguist and authored the famous brochure titled Marxism and Problems of Linguistics. And that's another subject for a very fanciful lecture, but I don't think Olga meant it literally about Marxism, but there are indeed problems of linguistics here. Olga, the microphone is yours, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and I want to say thanks to Yana Kane, and I will read her translation of my poem. Marxism and Problems of Linguistics. This is my mother tongue, not Granny's Yiddish, not my kids' Hebrew. That's how things turned out. No one to blame, no need for excuses. The Russian tongue doesn't belong to anyone. Not Stalin, not Putin, not Turgenev, not the Russian nation. The German tongue doesn't belong to anyone. Not Hitler, not Paul Celan. The English tongue doesn't belong to anyone. Not Ezra Pound, not Nelson Mandela. A tongue belongs to whoever speaking. Leave the Russian tongue in peace. At least if you aren't under bombardment, aren't burying your loved ones in playground sandboxes, those who have the right of pain and also the right to write, speak, sing in the Russian tongue or in any other.
Thank you so much, Olga. We will not pause for questions right now, but if authors can stay with us, I'm sure we will have questions and comments in the end. I move now to Jan Propstein. Jan, please. New York. And are you with us? I'm sorry.
I see him, but I can't hear him. He's speaking,
Jan,
and there's no
open
sound.
your microphone is muted, probably.
He's still speaking, but no sound.
Yes. Microphone is muted. We do not hear you, Jan.
If Ian cannot join, I will read the poem, but I hope you can read it in his voice.
Yes. I'm
His
sorry.
microphone on Teams seems to be active, but I guess maybe his computer isn't picking up audio or something.
Strange.
Yeah, he should allow his Microsoft
Yes.
to use the computer. It was.
I think we can. Okay. We can edit this recording later, but I wonder if what we can do right now. We didn't test everyone's computer.
How about I can read the poem and then towards the end I can try again?
Okay, go ahead.
Time has no time for time. The present resembles Orpheus. As soon as it looks back, there are only losses and a blinding future ahead. Go boldly on, yet remember, as soon as you lapse into silence, you will be torn apart by those who worship you.
I will read this poem by Marina Turina-Oberlander, who couldn't be with us. She is from Washington, D.C. And there is a subway station called DuPont Circle. And she told me that this poem refers to a quote from Walt Whitman, which is there on the wall as you go down the escalator at DuPont in Washington, D.C. I see the verse of one of the greatest poets who went through his experience sweet and sad, when civil war was coming to its end and he was hearing those soldiers' voices. To me, there's no sweetness in their pain. They gave their lives, but wasn't that in vain? There's no winner in a civil war when basic instinct suddenly turns wild and brother starts to fight his own brother. Their sisters pray behind the closed door, and mother grieves for every fallen child. The poem in English by Marina Turina-Oberlander, our author, and also the editor of the Boston Russian quarterly Vremena, the Times. I will continue with my translation of Nina Gade from Denmark, also a contributor to our program, a Scandinavian expat from Russia, who writes in Russian and also is very active in the Danish community, helping Ukrainian refugees. And that's a poem about Ukrainian refugees in Denmark she works with. How would they start a different life now, carrying graves cold under their heart? They finish their days by crying at night, and if not for the war, this distant country would not lure them with any gingerbread. Hotel for refugees, where bitter honey of sad lives fills the honeycomb of faceless little rooms. It bends the soul like endless space of scorched emptiness of their native land with hundreds killed. One has to live, to go on, at least for children. Here in the narrow corridor they play like goldfish, which escape from their nets to freedom and away from those bad news of madness and despair and grief. Their mothers share their pilaf with me. We raise our glasses to Ukraine, while war throws their husbands into the fire. I've been unable to find words for a year now, and I just cry with them. I only cry. Thank you, Nina Gade. And microphone back to Yana, please.
Yeah, thank you. This is my own poem. And I want to say that with my mind, with my, I don't know, ethical thinking, I'm with what Olga Agor was saying. I absolutely did not choose to stop writing in Russian. But what happened to me is that, at least so far, I've been unable to write in Russian since the start of the war. I wrote this poem in English and Russian, and then my Russian just stopped, at least in poetry. I hope it comes back. Mother tongue. I used to remember the first light, a slow kindling of dawn over the milky plain of fresh fallen snow. I used to remember the first words, more song than speech, a lullaby cradle woven secrets of spruce and birch thickets. Now, light is stained, an unwitting accomplice to the eyes taking aim at human targets. Now,
My memory stumbles among craters and wounds, deafened by explosions, by screams, by the dead silence of rubble. My mother tongue is struck dumb. Hatred sent its words to wage war.
Thank you, Anna. Our last poem, again by Galina Itskovich, refers to actual event of the Alexander Blok Monument in St. Petersburg. I need to remind our listeners that Alexander Blok is probably the last great poet of Russian Empire, technically speaking, of so-called Silver Age, who died soon after the Communist Revolution. And he has been kind of a symbol of both empire and revolution in Russian poetry, to put it briefly. Galina, please.
Yes, thank you. It's translated by Maria Blustein, and Maria has been translating my work a lot, poetry and nonfiction, and I really should mention her name because she's done a lot. She's done more than her share in this kind of fight against the expansion of the terrible things upon us. On the opening of the new Alexander Blok Monument in St. Petersburg. This is the city conceived by God, and this is Blok leaving the city that God conceived. And this is the noose at the end of the rope hanging from the invisible hook in the house that Blok left. And these are the poets feeling blocked back in the city and house minus Blok and God. And this is the bullet that led to Blok's fall. Now down will come Blok, the epoch, and all.
Thank you, Galina, and thank you also Maria Blustein, who translated a lot of various work from Russian. And we conclude here this part of the presentation. Again, this was partially based on our anthology, which came out in Kiev in the December of last year. We hope the series will continue. And I open microphone for any kind of comments, questions, please.
I only want to say, because I probably was too fast and didn't mention that I'm really, really very honored to participate in this presentation and very grateful to Victor and everybody who contributed and made this project possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marina. We're sorry, Ian, that we didn't have your voice heard, but there's something with your computer which didn't allow this. But please, questions from our small audience and comments, please. We know that there is, we all know here that you cannot really transmit a lot of poetry in the translation, but our efforts were really honest, and some of the translators are really, really good, trying to live inside the world of their author. It's a special skill. For myself, I'm not translating too much. It's much easier to write poems than translate. Because we can discuss this, but Yana mentioned just in the last segment a very obvious dilemma here for those of us who cannot write in Russian anymore and who have a choice of another language, English or Ukrainian. Many switch, many stop writing in Russian feel in this language, as Dr. Liberman said, disgraced. Others do not agree and still maintain their writing because it's not, it's regulated only from inside. So there are different modes, and everyone would, however, agree that we live in a very, very historical time from any aspect at the cusp of it. Yana, you had a question or comment? Yana, we don't hear you.
Yes,
Yes,
sorry.
yes, please.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment that it's a very interesting thing, this process of being in touch with a language that I used to translate from Russian, but I also used to write, poetry in Russian, and to be in touch with it primarily through translating the work of others. And I think that I've read somewhere a description of translation, which I think is translation of poetry, which I think is very apt. This is how it feels to me, that the subject of a poem is whatever that poem is about, and the subject that the translation, a poetry translation, is a poem whose subject is the poem that's being translated. So I, as a translator, I feel like I am writing a poem that is my reading of the poem I am translating. That's the only way, at least, I can experience, I guess, my own translation and also reading translations of others. Because it can't be the same poem, but yet it has to be a poem on the subject of the original poem.
Thank you. Thank you. Any more comments, please, or questions? Katerina, please.
Oh, thank you all very much for sharing your tворчество, well, it's not a good translation, but your talents with us. Thank you for sharing your poetry with us. I as Galina was reading her first poem, it came to mind that on this program, we very often have considered the impact of the war on animals, on domestic animals, on pets. And Galina, I really very much appreciate all these poems. I very much appreciate your poem, but especially that closing line. I could never have endured their stories if I were human. It is one of our regulars is Carol Smith, who is a psychologist, and the idea of like dissociation, of how you can't bear it, you have to become something else to bear it. That sympathy, that empathy, that in your poem that the animal kingdom is showing humans is very powerful and profound, and a way to maybe process all of this pain and grief, another way to process this pain and grief, which is so hard for us. So thank you. It was absolutely beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this comment. Yes, I'm trying to understand the mechanisms. I'm trying to understand humans, and actually there are so many animals in this war, animals who are affected, and how is it possible that humans that care so much about animals don't care about their own kind? We're the only ones like that. But yeah, I'm sure that Olga can also say something to that respect, because she's dealing with the atrocities of the other horrendous war in Israel as well. And also she is a psychologist, from what I know, right?
Thank you. And thank you to Olga also for joining. I know he is a Jungian psychotherapist, things which I probably have read about 50 years ago. Hope they didn't change much. Dr. Deutsch, please. Dr. Leonard Deutsch is right here. He's a former graduate dean of our university. And
I have a question for Olga. The perception here in the United States is that Israel has not been very supportive of Ukraine, and yet there are a number of people whose poems, people who originated from Ukraine, who are included in this anthology. So I have two questions for you. Number one, how welcoming was Israel to you as an expatriate from Ukraine? And two, what is your understanding of why Israel was unwilling to provide defensive dome or the sky shield, whatever it's called, to help protect Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine from being struck by missiles? Was that because they needed that protection for themselves, and it had nothing to do per se with Ukraine? Or what is your sense of the level of support for Ukraine in Israel right now?
Ольга, перевести?
На всякий случай, да, я вроде
Okay.
поняла, но
There are two complex questions. Первый насчет общей. Я сначала со второго начну. I will start from the second question. Общее настроение в Израиле в связи с поддержкой Украины. Из Америки оно видится так, что Израиль и с начала войны не сильно поддерживал Украину, еще до начала войны в Израиле, и не очень хотел делиться своим ПВО, железным куполом. Почему это? Это просто он нужен был для них самих. Ну, в общем, уровень поддержки, который в Израиле, Украине. Я могу перевести.
Можно я отвечу потом к первому
Да, я
вопросу?
переведу. Да.
Окей.
I will translate.
I'm sorry, my English isn't so good. I will speak in Russian, and Victor will translate it.
Definitely.
С самого начала войны в Украине Израиль принял максимальное количество беженцев. Эти люди, не имея права по закону о возвращении быть в Израиле, продолжают там находиться, получать какой-то уровень поддержки, и что будет дальше, будет видно.
Дайте я переведу понемножку. From the very beginning of Ukrainian war, Israel expressed the maximal level of support and in accepting maximal number of refugees who did not qualify for the law of return, non-Jewish refugees from Ukraine, and they continue right now, for the time being, to reside in Israel and have the level of support. Дальше, пожалуйста.
Что касается ПВО, я не думаю, что я могу ответить на этот вопрос, но я прошу не забывать, что страна находится в войне, что прямо сегодня у нас были 2 атаки, и бомбежки Израиля продолжаются. Прошу об этом не забывать.
Yes, about the Iron Dome and protection, all I can say that all Olga can say is that country is still in war right now. We had 2 missile bombardments today, and obviously we shouldn't forget about Israel being in war itself. Еще one more question. Еще один был вопрос. As we understand, you came to Israel from Ukraine, right? Originally, no?
No,
Откуда вы?
From Ukraine, from Odessa, but it was after the Second World War. They didn't return to Odessa after this, and I'm from Baku, Azerbaijan.
Oh, yes. Olga originally is not from Ukraine, from Azerbaijani capital of Baku. So her native language is, I assume, Russian. Ваш родной язык русский, так же, как и у меня. Well, in Baku, of course, you had people who spoke Azerbaijani and Armenian, but also, well, just like in Ukraine, Jewish population in Baku had Russian as the first language.
Yes.
It's complex. We have seen so many different combinations. Even on this program, we talked about identities all the time, so it's so easy to forget. My Olga's poem, by the way, mentioned Yiddish as her mother's language and Hebrew as her children's language, and the same actually is in most families, I would say. My grandfather spoke Yiddish, my grandson speaks English. So Russian has been for many, not most, but many, has been a temporary language of some kind. Talking about generations, I cannot say that you see the same continuity. I'm talking about poetry probably, because to this you all should add the factor that Russian poetry itself is very young. It's not like English. I mean, it hasn't even run out of rhymes yet. That's a special story. More questions, please. I know we mix and match a lot of things here, what with Russia and Ukraine and language and poetry and Israel and wars and history above all. But it's exactly this edge of communication when we can convey not just universal sentiments with poetry in translation, but also all this historical and cultural load, which we should leave outside when we enter poetry, probably, but we never can. So instead of talking in metaphors, I give anyone, we still have time, please give us your thoughts and comments and questions, even the naive ones, please.
So I hesitate to ask this one. I'm actually nervous about asking it, and it because the Ms. Oberlander is not here to
No.
answer for this. So I genuinely, this is not a criticism. It's just a genuine question. The comparison to Walt Whitman's writing about the American Civil War is a little bit hard, I think, because there's a lot of Americans who don't understand the difference between Russia and Ukraine, and to them, it's an eternal struggle. It's like they don't understand that this is two different countries.
Yes.
So that was a little bit dangerous, that the reference to it. I mean, that said, I think the point of the poem is the immense suffering that was the most bloodiest and brutal part of American history that every American can understand. But that was a little bit hard. The reference to the Civil War was a little bit hard.
I admit this, and Marina is not with us to answer.
Right,
but,
that's what I feel bad about asking.
But I included this poem because she asked me to, as a reference to Whitman and all that. It's an interesting point. On one hand, yes, this conflict in Ukraine is not a civil war, and all this stuff about brother attacking brother does not apply, not today. On the other hand, when with our culture, where we come from, Russian or Ukrainian, let's say ex-Soviet culture, the reference to civil war of 1917, 1921, civil war in the former Russian Empire, which embraced Russians, Ukrainians, and every other group. This still reminds us of this fracturing. So there is another layer here. which may not be immediately related to the American one. These are two different wars. But it is true that at this time, probably, within the society of communists and anti-communists, roughly speaking, there were many different groups, many different fractures, and we still didn't live through this. The legacy of the Russian/Soviet Civil War was not completely, still never will be completely assessed. We don't know the victims. We don't have memory for most of it. It preceded Holodomor, it preceded Holocaust, but by itself, it's a huge black hole in the history of this, let's say, geographic space. Both Russia and Ukraine in modern borders, Baltics, the entire continent, if you wish, Eurasia. Not even talking about Crimea as the central focus and the final chapter of this civil war. You cannot talk about history of Crimea without referring to what we called civil war. And at this point, it didn't matter which ethnic group you belonged to. I would dare to say, out of thousands of those who fled Russian Empire, they were all kinds of ethnic groups: Russians, Ukrainians, Jews, Baltic people, everyone, Germans. So I have a chat note here from Jan. Let me read it. Please put your notes in chats if you want to ask questions. Ian says, well, our viewer Leslie Titus says that poem of Miss Itzkovich, that's one about the animal, reminded him of Watership Down. If somebody knows the reference about the rabbit kingdom, the Watership Down. Ian writes, concerning the difference between Russian Federation and Ukraine, Trump understands, but paradoxically, he and his team support Putin and ostracize Zelensky and Ukraine. Well, here my Russian culture parallels fail. I could refer to Nikolai Gogol, but mostly to his Madman's Diary and History of King of Spain, if somebody is interested. But this is so far from any reality or real past history that I digress. I mean, you cannot be farther from the issues than Mr. Witkoff and the team. Any more, please, about, I'm ready to answer any questions. The publisher could not be here today, as we see, but we work with Oleg Fedorov on number of projects. These were 3 volumes of this anthology. There were several other projects, including some which were on this podcast, the Bazi-Wazi by Galina Itzkovich, Mokhotskatuha, the Rudy and the Milky Way by Grigory Falkovich, which I translated, the small book, all these published by Oleg. He publishes, as I said, incessantly. He has been established publisher for years before the full-scale war, and now emerged as a place where basically, I cannot say about Ukrainians. Of course, there are people of different persuasions and genres, prose and fiction and everything. But as far as I know, a lot of Russian emigres, former expats from the entire world, a lot of our authors from US to New Zealand have been publishing in Kiev in a way of support, in a way to show our appreciation and support. And I also know that he sells those books in Kiev. They are online. Many have e-version, electronic version. Our anthologies are in free access for download on the publisher's website. So Galina thanks Jan for his comment here in the chat. Any more questions? Please don't be intimidated by our intellectual luggage. It mostly has been molding without audience, without fresh air. So we're glad to share anything, at least from this cultural burden or legacy, whatever. We really, it's funny to feel like a late Roman person on some ruins. Olga is probably sitting on some of those, on many more. Down below you in Haifa, there are many rocks from all times. We are sitting on young soil here, over the ocean. But again, we thank Oleg for his incredible, very fast, extremely professional. Should I add that Fedorov's typesetters are in Kharkiv? I need to mention Alexandra Vasyanovich, who doesn't publicize her name, but she is one who typesets those books with extremely professional way, and the quality of books is amazing. Galina Itskovich wants to thank the Almanac for acknowledging Arkady Shtipel. He was a talented, kind, nuanced poet, and she had many great interactions with him. Unfortunately, I didn't know him myself, but yes, everyone who read. And I need also to thank Galina for contributing the little page about Bahit Kinzhev, who passed last year. Yana, please.
I also want to acknowledge David Siglevich. I knew him as Alexander Sasha Rutkevich,
Yes.
who was a really remarkable person. He was, by profession, he was a kind of a techie, but he was a very versatile writer. He wrote prose, he wrote poetry, he was a wonderful translator, and just the kind of person you want to get to know, you want to have around. Had the kind of radiance of humanity in him that came through in whatever he did. I had the pleasure of being with him on many. He belonged to, and I still belong to, Toronto Translators, a group of people who translate poetry, primarily into Russian, but from Ukrainian, from English. I'm the retrograde, I go the other way. But he was just a person, every time I see kind of reminder of his death, I physically gasp that he is not here.
Thank you very much. We're scattered, even in the US here. We rarely meet in person, but we are thankful. In fact, it was surprisingly the COVID pandemics which gave us those remote tools, which come from remote teaching, which many of us had to do. And then as the full-scale war started, we just decided to launch this podcast, and we have no intention to stop. We thank you all for coming and for contributing. I know this is a mixed and hybrid and improvised format, but we are only as good as our contributors, and people ask us who are our audience, and I tell them just to spread the word and post the link, and we will have the recording of our session very soon. Jan writes also, as for Bahit Kinzhev, there are 2 more books published after the one of Breath of Plague. One was selected poems by Freedom Letters. Freedom Letters is, if somebody doesn't know, it's a new publishing house by Grigory Urushadze, and outside of Russia, of course. And thank you, and for reminding this. I need to remind that the very first Bakhet's book was published 40 years ago by the famous artist in Michigan. Thank you very much, everyone who participated. If we have no more questions, I will ask Dr. Shrey to say final words. Please.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye. Great to see you
Bye.
all. Thank you.
It was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Victor, did you shut off the recording?